Today's deep dive looks at the potential of Pete Rose finally getting his chance to make it into the Baseball Hall of Fame. But along with that, we got to talk about the politics of the Hall of Fame. That'll be our deep dive. But before we hit the deep dive, our quick five. Number one, Wayne Gretzky gets disowned by Canada. Number two, are we the bad guys? The U.S. becomes the villain, it seems, in international sports. Number three, Bill Belichick goes to the School of Hard Knocks, or tries to. Number four, how come Major League Baseball seems to have just struck out with ESPN? And then five, robo-umpires. We can have robo-umpires. I'm Jason Kander, and I'm joined by Ravi Gupta and Adisu Demisi. Welcome back to the Game Within, where we talk about the business and politics of sports and how each shapes what happens on the field.
Well, first up, more Canada news. I don't know if I've ever talked this much about Canada in my entire life. But hockey legend Wayne Gretzky found himself on the business end of Canada's growing sports nationalism. From the New York Post, we've got a story here about Gretzky getting in some hot water with his fellow countrymen for seemingly, at best, not supporting the Canadians in the ways that the Canadians expected, and maybe at worst giving a nod to his adopted country of the United States. Adisu, you were born in Canada. How big of a deal is Wayne Gretzky in Canada?
It cannot be overstated how big of a deal Wayne Gretzky is in Canada. I mean, I will say, not unlike Michael Jordan in the United States, which is the analog I would make for what Gretzky, he is a generation removed from, if you're 30 years old now at this point, Gen Z, even young millennial, you weren't really there. I grew up in Canada during the heyday of the Oilers and Gretzky, and he was as big as Michael Jordan is in the United States and around the world. So it is akin to if Michael Jordan, were being disowned by the United States, which, give Trump, and he's got another 3 years and 11 months. We might end up there as well, but it's a pretty big deal.
Is it watered down at all by, it's sort of like, given that we have LeBron James and that Michael Jordan still lives in the United States, is it sort of like if there had been another Gretzky and, it's like if Jordan had moved to Toronto.
Yes.
Exactly. What I mean? But there hasn't been another Gretzky, but Gretzky lives, I assume, in Los Angeles?
Yeah. Last time I checked. Right, yeah. Well, let's for the audience, let's just say what he did exactly here, which is he gave a thumbs up allegedly to the Americans as he entered the arena, and he didn't wear a jersey of the Canadian team when they took the photo before the game. And Micah, I never know how to say his name, Runzioni, if you ever watch Miracle,
I think it is, yeah,
wore a USA jersey. I don't know about the jersey thing. I don't know.
Did Gretzky play on a Team Canada? Did he play in the Olympics? He did. Okay,
I'm sure. I'm
sure he did. Right.
The bigger thing is he's a big Trump guy. I think that's what the Canadians are taking issue with. Like he showed up.
He is a well-known Trump supporter. Dustin Johnson is his the golfer is his son-in-law.
Right, yeah,
right, and his daughter. So they're a big Trump family for sure. He was at the. You see the pictures here. I think he was at his inauguration, or no, he was at this either maybe election night in 2024 when Trump won. So he's a well-known MAGA supporter and a right winger. He supported Stephen Harper, the immediate previous conservative prime minister of Canada. So he's a known conservative politico and a Trump person. And
Trump had to take to his defense.
So Trump is
Truth Social to defend Gretzky. I'm not even
Wayne Gretzky. I will read this one. Wayne Gretzky is a fantastic guy! Exclamation point. They call him the Great One, and he is. It goes on. Look, Gretzky. Trump is clearly his friend, like a personal friend of his, aligned with his politics. But Trump has made Canada the butt of his jokes since before he took the inauguration now a month and a half ago. So it is.
And more than that, as of today, we're speaking on March 4th as the tariffs go into effect.
It's a good point. Yeah. So it's like both the butt of his jokes and the butt of his policies, I guess. And so here we are, where in the Four Nations face-off, this was a big deal, as we talked about last week, between the countries and the fights and all the things that happened in the pretty intense, exhibition competition. And then on top of that, now you got your most, it would be the equivalent of LeBron James or Michael Jordan apparently kind of seemingly rooting for Canada in a,
Mhm.
or France in the Olympics last year.
Have we ever had a rivalry with Canada on anything before now? I'm trying to remember, like a real rivalry in anything, sports or
Hockey.
otherwise.
It's only hockey, I think.
Yeah,
Right.
but even that is like it's almost like
It's not. It
I,
doesn't. No.
it's like
It's
like
like
a
our
whether
rivalry with
they'll win.
Mexico over soccer, which is a real
So
rivalry,
but it's very
but they take
friendly.
it. It's their
The U.S.
biggest.
Mexico.
No,
I
no,
guess
no.
that's not true, is it?
That's
Yeah.
really vicious. Yeah, that's a vicious rivalry. But the thing is, what those both have in common is we care less about the sport that the other country cares more about. So it just makes it like a big brother, little brother thing going on. I'm tempted to say nothing to see here, but I really do think that Gretzky didn't read the room well. You got to go like with dynamics at play like this. I think you got to go above and beyond to distance yourself when things are running as hot as they are at the moment.
It's a fascinating political bank shot, right? And I don't think it's a good one, but it's like if you're Trump, I mean, let's just go politics for a moment and then how it bleeds into sports. If you're Trump, you're always trying to do things that people find interesting. You're usually going to score some points with the majority of Americans when you lean into basic nationalism, and especially if it's nationalism that from the outside seems like there's really no major victim. Or I mean, I think that there are big problems when it comes to the tariffs and everything else. So that's sort of the root of that policy, right? Like you can unite Americans around the idea that there's, a rival or an adversary that we can all be against. Choosing Canada is an odd choice, but then when you blend it with sports, now it's more accessible to everybody. So I'm not sure what the point of constantly trolling Canada. Maybe I'm missing something.
I don't think you are. I don't think he has a point to this. I think well, it's probably about a personal disdain for Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, who he thinks is whatever, and who is extremely unpopular in Canada. To be clear, right now, he's, Conservatives are going to win most likely the next election in Canada for not dissimilar reasons from why President Biden was defeated in the election last year. It's just, the way.
But even they hate Trump. Like, or
but yes, but they hate Trump. To be clear, they hate Trump more than they hate Trudeau. But they hate Trudeau. But my point is that he has a weak, I don't even want to call them adversary. They're an ally, but a weak counterpart across the border there that's easy to beat up on right now. And he's just taking swings because he's a bully is really what it comes down to. And he can. And unfortunately for him, and I think weirdly how Wayne Gretzky got caught up in all this, it's become a geopolitical and sports issue when it really just started with Trump being an egotistical bully, which may be just how things happen nowadays in geopolitics.
That's a good segue to our story number 2, which is related, which is Will Leach wrote this piece in New York Magazine called "The United States is Becoming a Global Sports Supervillain." And it talks about something I hadn't thought about, which is we are hosting the World Cup, as you know, Adisu, you're working on this, and then the Olympics. Both are going to happen during the Trump administration while he is, shall I say, instigating some rivalries and more around the world. This is not a politics podcast, but obviously what happened in the Oval Office with Zelensky, plus the tariffs, plus just his general manner, combines to make one wonder, like, man, are we the bad guys? And I know that the players are their own themselves, but it's like when I watch a sport, especially as the Ukraine war was going on, and I'm like, oh, it's like somebody from Belarus or something, and I know nothing else about them, I'm instinctively rooting against them.
Oh, Russia, like it's just so easy. You're just like, well, that's the villain.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, we're on their side now, so what does that make us? We're literally part of the same coalition.
What's that meme? Like, are we the baddies? Like, I feel, it's very confusing. And it's not even confusing. It's just like sad. It just makes me sad. I like being the good guys. I don't want to be the bad guys. And
it's also not very hard to be the good guys when right.
We're hosting. We're hosting. This is a huge bummer.
There's a bunch of World Cup matches that are going to be in Kansas City.
And here in the Bay Area too.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about this before. We have the booing at the Four Nations matchup. Apparently, it's been happening. It happens at Raptors games. Anyway, Philip put together this compilation. Is this a video, Philip? A compilation? If so, let's see it.
Don't boo, man.
This is a WWE event.
Yeah, they're booing. I mean, they're booing America at a WWE event. Now we're in an MLS game. All right, and that's in addition to the hockey thing. Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like we're the bad guys now.
Yeah. There's not really much more to say.
Okay,
Like,
Pat McAfee, I think, drew the wrong lessons here. Let's go to this clip. He really stepped in it.
These are the most stacked elimination chambers that the WWE has ever had. Kind of sucks that it's in the terrible country of Canada that booed our national anthem to start this entire thing.
Stand now from the Canadians that they have a lot more passion for their country than I could have ever imagined. A lot of terrible things have been said about me, and I understand it. You boo my country, I called your country terrible. Let's shake hands, okay? You said you didn't boo every member of the United States or every citizen of the United States of America. Well, I didn't say the Canadians are terrible. I said your country was. So you booed us. I said you're terrible. Let's shake hands. Let's move along.
There you
go. That's what I would like to say. And I still love Canadians.
It's not a bad walk back, I have to say.
It's
That's
a
actually
smart
pretty strong
walk back. But okay, a couple things I drew from that. One, they have ESPN in Canada, and
Yeah.
and he was like, "Oh crap." Two, he clearly brought NCAA college game day energy to the set there at the WWE, like, because I've seen him do that on Saturday mornings plenty, where he's in hostile territory or whatever, and he's like, it's fun, right? He says some bad stuff about the home fans, and then they're sort of like, yeah, roast us, but we hate you, but we don't, and which is what's funny about this is he's in this clip, he's at a quote unquote sporting event that is actually not real. And when he does it during game day, that's actually a real sporting event. Now here he is at a WWE event where everything is scripted, and they're like, "Whoa, no, don't do that."
that's too far, bro.
Yeah,
I mean, this has got serious. I have to say, first of all, he's a regular commentator on WWE. I do still occasionally check in with my WWE fandom from when I was a little kid, but one thing I got to say is, are we headed for McAfee, Stephen A. Smith, 2028? Like,
maybe so.
That's
a great question.
He's clearly a more adept politician than many with that walk back. But
McAfee Rogers
on one side and
Cuban Smith or Smith Cuban.
Smith Cuban, I think. I don't think Stephen A. Smith is interested in being the vice president of anything.
Yeah,
I don't think Cuban is either. But it's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's a fake. I mean, it's a staged show, and he was clearly doing an act. And like, I thought that was kind of unnecessary. Like, sure, that's exact. In fact, that's exactly where you do that kind of thing. Like,
right. That's what I don't get.
It's fine, right? And the funny thing is, it's really perfect because this is like the WWE-ification of everything, right? Trump is basically doing a WWE act as president, and it turns out that has real ramifications. Like, people can die because you do that, or countries can suddenly prices of things can go up, like what is about to happen in the US. But like McAfee, that was great. Like, I thought that's exactly what you do when you're the heel commentator in the WWE. But it is pretty sad to think that is, Trump is in the WWE Hall of Fame, by the way. He did a whole angle in the 2000s at some point.
He definitely has earned his stripes. Like, if you watch the Vince McMahon documentary, which is really good, Trump is like a legit been in WWE matches. It's popular for a reason, because it's like fun and it's over the top and it's circus, right? But man, the fact that we've brought circus to politics at that level, where like countries can be booing us and actually be serious about it, and like, we're the heel. Maybe it's not that we're the villain, we're the heel, is the way Trump sees it, right? It's like, I'm playing a position, but like the world is seeing us as actual
villain, and there are real world consequences to it.
Well, I mean, and there's going to be real sports consequences potentially, right? Because when you think about, when you look at the way it works in the Olympics, right? Because of the war in Ukraine, for instance, as Robbie, you alluded to, there, and also because of the doping scandals, when Russia has had to compete over the last few Olympics, they've competed as, like whatever what do they call them? Like Russian athletes, but they can't compete for Russia, which from what I can tell, essentially means nothing, because then Russia just says, yeah, we won this many gold. And it's just the rest of the world going, well, it doesn't really count. And Russia's like, it counts. And that's pretty much the sum of it. But so if we're joining, which it appears we are, after, Jon Stewart perfectly described what happened in the Oval Office as a heel turn with Zelensky, like, at what point are we just the ones where the whole world wants to root against in the Olympics in the world? And were we already there? Maybe just by dominating?
There's some of that, but it's a little bit different valence. Like, and bringing it back to the documentary series that we talked about last week. Yes, there was like we want to beat the US, but it's kind of like the Bills fans wanted to beat the Chiefs or something. It's like sports hate, but this is like real hate.
But that was like, we just want to beat them because they're the best. And if we beat them, we're the best.
And there's like resentment, and you could tell that there's things with the players, like where they think that like they're being written off. And there's definitely some like sports resentment against LeBron and like some of these guys who've been around for a while and KD, but it's combined with a level of respect that I think is missing in some of these interactions that involve more heated geopolitical dynamics. And I think there's a possibility that Trump's calling people into the Oval Office ahead of the Olympics in the US, and we're getting to the Putin like shenanigans around doping and stuff like that, and I don't know enough about who appoints who, but what we do know from over the past few weeks is that if there's anything in the line of side of the president to appoint people in charge of these Olympic committees, all sorts of weird shit is going to happen for our athletes.
Well, I think at a minimum, you're going to have a situation where he's going to want to put himself into the middle of all of the stories about
it's going to be horrible. He's going to be everywhere during both.
And as an athlete who, let's be honest, like let's say you're a 21-year-old Olympic athlete in an individual sport, the chances that you have had the opportunity to really have a chance to even think about what it is you might believe politically is pretty slim, because you've been so singularly focused on your sport your entire life in order to get to the point where you could be in the Olympics. That, I mean, you're going to ask people like that who honestly may not be able to tell you the difference between a Democrat and a Republican. And you're going to put them in a position where they've got to figure out how to navigate, like the president of the United States wanting them to stand in the Oval Office with them before the games, or whether to shake that president's hand, whether
it's like Commodus. It's like at the Gladiator Arena. This reminds me of a story that seems false, but really got my back up, which is, I don't know if you guys saw the speculation that Elon Musk would buy the Buffalo Bills. Apparently his dad said that he's a big Bills fan, which makes no sense.
Yeah.
I honestly greeted this in a way you probably wouldn't predict. I was like, that could be interesting, because it would be the one thing that would happen to rid me of this disease.
I knew you're
that is being a Bills fan. It would actually give me a clean break,
Yeah.
It's like being in a tough relationship and you find out your partner cheated on you, and you're just like, you know what? I have something now. I have a story. Like, I have my story.
I wish that for you for two reasons. One, because I know how much it pains you to be a Bills fan. And two, I think that the Bills would tank, and they seem to be the peskiest AFC rival to the Chiefs.
We all win. We all win.
Yeah.
Well, look, we're not going to be disowning the United States in the World Cup or in the Olympics, but it is going to be weird to have them on American soil and to have people booing the American national anthem and rooting against our team, not in a sports hate way, but in the same way that we would root against the Russians or the Soviets for that battle during the Cold War. Like, that is what it's going to be like in our own country. And God knows that the president is probably going to take advantage of that moment to try to, whip up some nationalism. but probably also whip up some dislike as well, and it's just going to get worse and worse.
Just think about 2028. It used to. 2028 is going to be the end of the Trump presidency in the middle of a Democratic primary and election. That's going to be an election summer, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the one saving grace is the candidate. There'll be a little bit of political balance. There'll be a high profile nominee who will also be showing up to things and trying to make news. And, people will have two different people to choose from if we still are functioning by then. Let's go to story 3 here, which is Bill Belichick, who is now the head coach of UNC, apparently was flirting with doing a Hard Knocks, which I think would have been incredible TV. And apparently the owners nixed it, because they have the rights to Hard Knocks. Why do the owners hate Bill Belichick so much? Is it just a craft thing?
I don't know. I mean, he's probably not an easy guy to get along with because he figures he's got it all. He knows everything, right? And didn't he? Because wasn't he GM and coach? So and that's not something that you see very often anymore, which I think, and which he probably wanted to have again, which probably contributed to why he didn't get a job. He seems like a kind of cantankerous guy. So it's fascinating to me that he was like, you know what I want?
But as opposed to who? Like, you name all these
follow
coaches.
Me all the time.
Jason, you look at all these coaches. Are any of like you could name some really tough personalities out there amongst
but like what's his name? The guy in Miami seems to be very camera friendly. He seems to do very well. I forget his name right
McDaniel.
now. Yeah, he does a great job with it. The guy in Detroit. I don't know how he would do if Hard Knocks were in there every day, but people like rooting for that.
Well, he did. He was on Hard Knocks.
He was. That's
a
right.
Big star. Yeah.
And then everybody loves Andy Reid, but I don't think anybody would say like, well, I just want to watch Andy Reid every day. He's great television. I mean, part of the reason he's not great television is because he's such a good coach, I guess. But also the thing going on here as well is that Hard Knocks is a show where it's kind of notorious for franchises are really of two minds of whether they even want to participate, because every season, part of the reason it does so well is there's a lot of drama. There's a lot of personality drama. There's very compelling storylines. And so I think franchises aren't sure whether they always come off all that positively on it. Whereas, I'm of the belief that you can have compelling storylines without the franchise coming off poorly, but clearly not all the franchises feel that way. So it's interesting that Belichick wanted it to come into UNC.
Yeah, I was going to say college would be super interesting. I mean, I think it does make sense for the NFL not to want college sports to be. I mean, if this is a showcase of the NFL and the promotion of the NFL, and I've watched Hard Knocks on and off for the last few decades or whatever, however long it's been on, but when I do watch it, it definitely gets me more excited for the football season. Mm-hmm. So like, if that's the point of the show, why would you have a college program on there? With that said, Ravi, you were about to say this, watching a entirely different business. And now with NIL, it is a business of sports from behind the scenes with a character that you already know, Bill Belichick, or at least that's relatively well known in the sports universe, would be really compelling television to promote football, but not necessarily. And honestly, Bill Belichick, who would undeniably be the star, because who has heard of anybody else on the UNC football team? But I can get why the owners were like, wait a second, this is our thing. This is professional football thing.
The thing is, it's going to happen anyway. You have the Amazon show, I forget what it's called, where they've done everything from rugby to, Manchester City to American. Yeah. They did the Cardinals. So it's like the football Cardinals. And so Belichick's, he's now signaled he wants to do this. Netflix or Amazon is going to pick this up, if not Apple, who also has their own version of this. They did it with surfing. It's all the same, by the way, all the same producers who do the tennis stuff and all that. And it'll be great television. It'll be great for recruiting. And they usually give you a veto over what shows up. Like if you paid attention, Hard Knocks is getting more bland every year because they're killing anything that interesting.
Well, I think I'm right about this, that, Skydance does Hard Knocks now, and Skydance has, like an official relationship as the studio of the NFL, which is probably part of that. But then, but it is possible to do, I think, really compelling with a good central personality, really compelling docu-follow sports stuff without having like creating villains within the characters. And I think the best evidence of that is if you watch the Coach Prime show on Amazon, which, at Colorado. And before that, I think, did he do it for a season at Jackson State? I think he did. Yeah. I think he did the show there too. And I've seen both of them, and they're really good. And you're not like, oh, I see who the villain is. Every once in a while there'll be like an off camera, like another coach who takes a little bit of a not villain arc, but adversary arc. But mostly it's just, Deion Sanders. You could put a camera on Deion Sanders doing anything, and it's pretty entertaining. I don't know if that's true of Bill Belichick.
What I find usually in watching these things is that these people are less impressive than you think they are. They're way more like shooting from the hip, and their systems don't make a lot of sense, at least from a teaching perspective. I have a colleague who's like this teaching expert who actually coaches sports teams. And we sometimes we'll go through footage and talk about like how the coaches talk to their players and stuff. And it's like crazy. And that's his whole job is he works with Champions League soccer teams to help them improve on these things. Belichick, though, is the exception. He did this show, by the way, there's a sound truck because Mardi Gras passing by my apartment, if you can hear it. There was a show that followed him years ago, and I forget what it was after one of the controversies, and I was very impressed. Like, he turns out he's a good coach. Newsflash.
Yeah, no, I mean, shocker. Like,
yeah,
you're making news, Ravi.
Yeah. Yeah. He just knows everything about the sport. There's a good book, by the way. Ian O'Connell wrote a book about Belichick. That's really, really good. Same guy did the Rogers documentary. Well, okay. We have another story. This is story number 4, and we're getting into baseball territory, JC. So I'm going to lean on you here. But ESPN and MLB seem to have nixed their contract.
Yeah, so ESPN was set to pay $550 million a year from 2026 to 2028 for the right to air 30 regular season games per season. These are the games that, it seems to me, are almost always Yankees Red Sox, but I guess they do air other stuff. It just seems like it's always
Cardinals Cubs every third or fourth week.
Right. But they also do, the annual home run derby. They do the wild card playoff round. Apple also pays $85 million a year for a package of Friday night games. Roku pays around $10 million a year for a number of Sunday games. ESPN chairman Jimmy Pitaro visited MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred late last year. He carried a harsh message. America's most prominent sports network thinks baseball's TV rights are declining in value. And then he was, back to tell Manfred that ESPN planned to exercise an opt-out clause. We have a clip here of former ESPN president John Skipper talking about who walked away from who.
Believe that ESPN doing a baseball deal with the NFL negotiation in front of them, with the NBA negotiation in front of them, with the college football playoff negotiation in front of them, probably insisted on an opt-out. It may well be the case that baseball said, we're fine with that because we're not happy with the way we're being treated, so we're happy with the opt-out. It's not my instinct that that's what happened. My instinct is that ESPN wanted not to go long-term because they had other money they were going to have to spend. They have to save some money in the current environment, and they wanted the option to save that on baseball. But I do not know that they made the decision before baseball or baseball made the decision before them. I will say that the tone of Mr. Manfred's statement reads like the person who got served, not the person who was serving.
Skipper, by the way, looking good. I don't know if you follow Skipper's career, but when he was CEO, he had to step down because he had a drug addiction and somebody was trying to blackmail him. I mean, he looks like Steve Jobs there. He looks like he's chilling. He's doing
on
well.
That show pretty regular.
They also passed up F1 rights too, like an extension of their F1 rights, ESPN. So it looks like they're penny pinching so they can go big on a couple of sports.
That's what I think too. I think that there are plenty of suitors for broadcasting rights when it comes to baseball, but some of the other, but there's some balls in the air, right? I mean, like, pun intended, I guess, when it comes to NBA broadcast rights, NFL broadcast rights. And if you're ESPN and you are, it seems, contracting with, people cutting the cord with cable and everything else. It's getting harder and harder to compete. I mean, we've seen ESPN go through and fire a whole bunch of commentators a couple of times now, a couple of rounds of that. And we've talked a lot about, like, because that's who Stephen A. Smith is with. And so his negotiations are, I mean, like, it
run out of money at some point.
yeah. And it just may be that. And also for baseball, I think baseball may be looking at it going, okay, there's some other places we can go that can provide more to us than just the broadcast rights. There's non-game content, that kind of thing. I would posit a third thing that Skipper didn't mention, which is it may have made economic sense for both sides to do.
Yeah,
this.
I think it feels like it's a mutually beneficial thing. This is like any team. I'm thinking about the Oklahoma City Thunder in the NBA. They have all these players on rookie contracts that are excellent players, and they're all coming to a head. They're not going to be able to keep all of them if they don't start shedding salary now. And
Rockets too. Yeah,
Rockets. There are a few teams like this. The Warriors were like this back in the day. And so this is like for ESPN, it's an early shed of a contract that maybe they might have wanted to keep in another world, but they're more interested in going after the NFL, or keeping it Monday Night Football, as it were, keeping the college football playoff, et cetera. And then on the MLB side, I think Skipper, it makes a ton of sense to me. Like, they're getting kind of the like crumbs of what ESPN can do in terms of coverage, in terms of everything else that the NBA and NFL are getting, so they can maybe go to a partner who really, really needs them. And honestly, let's be honest, baseball needs a shakeup. Like we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. It has with the pitch clock and Ohtani, it has some stars like coming up, but it could use just a snow globe shake and maybe somebody who has a little different perspective on how to broadcast and market the game than what ESPN has done with Sunday Night Baseball for God knows how long. It's been 30 years. What is it? 40 years? It feels like it's been forever.
There's also just the changing element of how all of these sports, like it used to be the case for years. It was the case that, like, if you wanted to see, if you wanted to see Barry Bonds play, and you didn't live in San Francisco when he was playing there, the only time you were really going to get to see it live is if it was a nationally broadcast game. So if it was postseason, or if it was like Sunday Night Baseball or that kind of thing. The MLB app, just like, NBA League Pass and all that stuff, is very popular, and it definitely changes the entire scenario of what those broadcast rights for, not for an individual team. That's a different thing. That's like your regional broadcast partners, but just to broadcast these games that are not local games for people. If I have the MLB app and I want to watch Ohtani play, and it's just a Dodgers game that's being broadcast by the Dodgers and by whoever they're playing, as long as I'm not in that area, I can open it up on my phone and I can watch it anytime. And that definitely changes the market.
Quiz for you guys.
ESPN's thing.
Amazon, ABC, which is or Disney, this is a parent company, ESPN. Amazon, ABC, Netflix. How would you put the order of that market caps of those companies?
What do you
mean?
Biggest companies first.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I'd say Amazon, Disney, and then Netflix. Maybe
Amazon, Netflix, Disney. So 2.14 trillion is Amazon, 370 billion is Netflix, and about 197 billion is Disney at the moment. So even Netflix is a bigger company right now. So and we're talking about the entire parent company of Disney, right? ESPN is
not just ESPN. It's like ABC and Mickey Mouse.
They are going up against these companies, and forget Amazon for a second. Just focus on Netflix, because that's the cleanest. That is all they do is streaming entertainment. Like, this is not a fair fight for them anymore. They're not the big dogs anymore. They could possibly lose all these rights. And
to my earlier point, MLB has got I bet you Manfred is dying to get to Netflix's door, because not just for the money, but because Netflix seems to be this is the next frontier for them. Like, live sports is going to be the thing that brings them the next wave of subscribers. And so it might be a match made in heaven, right? For them, it's a ton of content. You bring in a niche at this point, but very large by market niche of fans that might not already be on Netflix. And like, you get your premium live sport.
It's more than just subscribers though, because there's a lot of ways to grow your subscriber count, and some people would argue Netflix, they're certainly not at the limit, but their subscriber count is enormous. But if you are a streamer and you have an advertising tier, you need live sports. And even if you're not playing toward your advertising tier, if you simply want to have ad revenue, then you've
Gotta have
live sports are super important. All right. And so that's why it was so clutch when they pulled off the Christmas Day game after the Paul Tyson fight. They had technical problems. And so everybody was wondering, like, are they going to be able to pull off? Because it was Chiefs and I can't remember who we played on Christmas Day.
Raiders, I think.
Well, that was the year before. Maybe it was the same again. I can't remember. But anyway, we just win so much. It's hard to keep track. But it was a huge deal.
You did lose one game that season.
Yes, we did. But anyway, so for the streamers, they're definitely entering this space in a big way.
Yeah, we talked about WWE. That was their, they have the Christmas Day game. Now they have WWE Raw on Monday nights, which I did not watch last night, even though I really wanted to, going to our previous conversation. But like they're there. Like it is, I don't know what it's going to be, but they're going to get, and MLB feels like the right, for all the reasons you said, all the reasons we've discussed, what Skipper said, I think that's where we're headed. That's just a guess.
Well, story number 5, and I already caught Philip loading up a video. I know where this is going, but we have Robo-Umps coming. Is that what's going on here?
Yes. Okay. So, all right. Well, let's start with the video, and then we'll talk about it.
Put that in your left ear.
Okay. That could quickly change.
So this thing's just going to tell me what happens.
If anyone with an earpiece can call a pitch.
Oh, strike. Yeah. So you just hear it right in your ear right away.
ABS tracks pitches with technology similar to what broadcasters use to show viewers the pitch location.
We've got the box there. You can see it's well within it.
Now that virtual box is making the actual call.
Ball. Oh, that looks good to me.
So if you're listening on audio only, that is somebody standing there as the umpire, but getting an earpiece that's telling them what the computer is saying, whether it's a ball or a strike. And what's funny about it is the quote unquote umpire commenting on, wow, wouldn't have thought that was a ball. But it was, and so obviously this whole concept is controversial because right now what they're doing is they used it in the minor leagues last year. I actually went to a game in Oklahoma City and saw how it worked, and it works very quickly. And now that if you're watching any spring training games, you're seeing how it's working. There's 13 spring training ballparks in Arizona and Florida that have it, and so that's basically 60% of the games this spring training we'll see it. And there is strategy involved, which is kind of fun. That basically you have to decide whether to challenge that pitch, and you basically just like put your hand to your helmet, and then it happens very quickly. It's just a few seconds, and it's shown, like if there's a jumbotron, it's shown up on the jumbotron where it was, and the crowd can react. I have my opinion. I know I'm the baseball guy here. I'm curious what y'all think of this.
I love it. I big L love it. Maybe I'm an outlier here too, but I think for two reasons. One, I love the speed of it. Part of the reason I don't like replay or I don't love replay in basketball and football to some extent is that it takes too long. But tennis, this feels the most like the Hawkeye in tennis, which they have at the majors. It makes, first of all, it's fast. And second of all, it becomes a character in the game, which I love. Like the putting it up on the jumbotron and letting people watch the pitch come in just like we all do, as they just said in the clip on television, will make it more interactive and more fun. And the strategy of it is the last thing. Like, as long as you limit the use of it to some strategy, this is what I do like about basketball and to some extent tennis when they first introduced it, is you can't overuse it. Even if you get it right, you should not be able to overuse it and use it over and over again, but like save it for the moments where it's a high leverage situation. You bring it in, it happens in 10 seconds, none the wiser. Robo-Umps permanently calling the ball and strikes. No, you want user error to be a part of sports. It's a part of sports for the players. Why shouldn't it be a part of sports for the umpires too? But to correct high leverage moments, really important calls, and and or at least give the players or the managers a chance to correct it. I love it. Like, I just think it'll make the game more fun.
There's a literal brass band going by, so I'm muting myself and unmuting myself. So I go further. I think like it depends on the sport. Obviously, the more complex the interactions and situations, like football is hard, basketball, there's just too many things happening to just have like a simple yes, no in the way that you do for tennis and baseball. Tennis is the easiest because it's not a different person going up to the batter's box each time. So it's just like, did the ball hit the line or not? Right. And that shouldn't be a subjective exercise. And if you've ever played tennis against somebody who cheats, it is maddening. I was arguing with a buddy of mine once where he was like, he's like, man, I'm sorry. I know I'm not good at calling these. I was like, it's fine, but all your mistakes are in one direction. Like they all favor you. So it tells me there's something else going on here. Now I think in this situation, I get the drama of the umpire and like arguing with the ump and all that, but I'm like, this should be mathematical. It should be a mathematical way to say what a strike zone is and whether the ball like crossed it or not. So why not just use it every time?
I like introducing more strategy, particularly when this can be done quickly. I like the idea that you only get a couple challenges a game. I like that. And I try not to be a purist about baseball because I find that baseball purists are generally the people who make baseball less fun to watch, right? Like people who are like, just learn to hit the ball the other way. The shift is fine or whatever, all that. I don't agree with all that. I do, however, have two things. One, they can show me all the times they want that the strike zone can adjust for Jose Altuve to Aaron Judge, but it sure don't look that way to me when I watch it on TV. It sure looks like that box doesn't move that much when there's a guy who's 5'6" in the box and a guy who's 6'6" in the box. And that troubles me, right? But then the other piece is, one of the elements that makes baseball, I think, really interesting is that different umpires have different zones. And it's not to say that means their strike zone is wrong. It means umpires are different heights. Some umpires set up over the catcher's left shoulder. Some set up straight over top. Some set up over the right shoulder. Some are going to call it differently with a right-handed batter, a left-handed batter. And part of baseball is getting to know that sort of thing. Is and I, as like a intense baseball fan and player, like I like that. I like that. Like the first 3 innings, it's sort of like the pitcher has to figure out, oh, am I getting that pitch? Oh, I'm getting that pitch. I'm going to keep throwing it. Oh, I'm not getting that pitch. That's taken away. I do think that's an interesting part of the game. And I just played this tournament this weekend and like a very high strike was called on me. And there's a baseball etiquette, which is you don't turn and look at the umpire. You say, and if you're smart, you learn the umpire's name before the game so that you're not just calling him blue. And you say, like, Frank, is that the top of the zone? And he'll say, yep, that's the very top. And then like, okay, I have to swing at that, but I have to swing at it. And you're working back and forth. I do like that part of the game. I don't know that other people do.
I actually, that is a compelling argument, Jason, I got to say. And I also wonder, and this is probably overdoing it, but can AI help here? Like, you're not going to get a ton of challenges in the first inning. And can the strike zone, can AI kind of learn the strike zone over the course of a game? And thus, if a strike is called at the top of the zone in the first inning, and then it gets challenged in the 8th inning to basically force the umps to be more consistent, because that would actually be an interesting development while also probably being completely infuriating to the players, because then you can't actually count on something. But I do agree with you that there are, you think about Greg Maddux or some of the better pitchers in history who've had wonderful control. They get better strike zones because the umpires believe they're better. Rightly believe they have better control. So if Greg Maddux thinks it's a strike, then you probably should think it's a strike too. And so maybe the strike zone expands and contracts with pitchers by game, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, it's the same in how I feel in basketball. I got so pissed off about the Warriors game where I felt like it's being reffed both ways or differently both ways. It's not actually the perfection of a strike zone from chest to letters to knees or whatever it is. It's actually whatever you're calling for that guy, you better call for us too. And as long as it's consistent within the game, it kind of doesn't, I mean, it matters on the margins what the strike zone did, but it doesn't matter on the margins. It matters on the absolutes. So I'd be interested to see if there's a way to like make sure that the strike zone is internally consistent in a game as opposed to consistent across all 160
Imagine if
games.
you were replacing this with like something with higher stakes, and you're like, okay, which is actually literally true as well, which is like if you're in the legal system and you're like, hey, you know what? There are different judges, and those judges have their different proclivities, and you could go away for the rest of your life, or you could get acquitted. You never know. And you're like, if
well, that is the way it works.
No, but I'm saying,
juries.
but nobody on this podcast thinks that's a good thing.
Yeah,
so it's like, you know,
sort
so
of.
like,
I mean, on the one hand, but then we're probably not all for like mandatory minimum sentences either. You know what I mean?
Good
Because-
comeback.
You want you want discretion, but you want it within some kind of box of whatever reasonableness or name your thing.
Here's the thing about this that I think is not being said that is going on in baseball, which is if you're trying, I don't think it's just about trying to get the most accurate strike zone. I think it's about trying to keep all the strikes within the little box, because the other thing that baseball does need to do is increase offense, because one of the things that's happened is like, you know, think how that movie, The Rookie, with Dennis Quaid, where he plays the guy from Texas who ends up, you know, making it, he's like a high school coach, and he goes to try out and he makes it to the major leagues. If you think back on that movie, which is set in like the early 90s, it's not that, or I'm sorry, the early 2000s, it's not that long ago, that he was throwing 96 miles an hour, and as a result, he shot straight to the big leagues. 96 miles an hour is like, you know, average now. I mean, like you and the spin rate and like what pitchers are doing, and they're lifting so heavy, and then they're getting like 2 Tommy Johns per career because they're expected to just like spin these curves and sliders so hard. My point is, it is the hardest to hit in the major leagues that it's ever been. And so offense is down. And we've already been through the steroid era, and nobody wants to go back through that. And because of baseball's traditions, nobody wants to lower the mound, nobody wants to move it back. So I think that's the unspoken part of this, is if we can rein in the pitchers a little bit more, then maybe we give a little more of an advantage to the hitters, and the game gets more exciting because there's more offense. I think that's the unspoken part of this.
Fair.
All right, there's one other element.
Speaking of tradition, I think we might have to. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Jay.
I was going to say there's one other part of this, which is that
we could skip this whole part, Jason. I know where you're going.
No, it's okay. We can do it. The automated.
We're running out of time. I want to be respectful of the audience's time here.
Okay. Ravi doesn't want to talk about the Bills and Josh Allen. I was honestly figuring I was teeing it up for you to just be like, look, I am vindicated, but
I don't want to be right. I actually wish I was wrong on this one. I wish I believed what you believe, you know?
Okay. Well, that concludes the quick five. Shall we go? Shall we go into the deep dive?
Let's talk about some other baseball traditions then.
All right. Absolutely. Go, Dizu, you lead us into it. Go ahead.
I mean, okay. So you may have seen this past week that the President of the United States has some opinions on a recently deceased non-member of the Baseball Hall of Fame, baseball hit leader Pete Rose. In a statement on Truth Social, Trump wrote that he will be issuing a complete pardon of Pete Rose, who gambled on his own team back in, when was it, in the 80s, which then made him permanently ineligible for the Hall of Fame. The president criticized Major League Baseball for not having the courage or decency to put Rose in the Hall of Fame while he was alive, and urged them to posthumously award him the sport's biggest honor. I think we have a clip here of Trump trying to do this when in his first administration, and his then chief of staff talking about it.
What will this bring up again now is the Pete Rose issue. That Pete Rose, the greatest hitter of all time, has been banned for life for betting on his own team while he was coaching. He's still alive. He's not in the Hall of Fame, and this will bring it back to the forefront. You will not have congressional hearings on what happened here in the last 24 hours, but every now and then we did talk about having congressional hearings about Pete Rose, and we even talked about it in the White House.
Well, that's real.
Yeah.
What do you mean, congressional?
Just in the White House.
On Pete Rose?
On Pete Rose, yeah.
You wanted to
raise the issue. It's almost like a conversation you have about pardons with criminals, right? If we're going to pardon this person or this person, what can we do to help Pete Rose?
What would you have done with Pete Rose in the White House?
I think Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame.
No, I know, but what would you have done in the White House?
We talked about having the president come out and do something and even just raise the issue.
Well,
what is it? Somebody explain to me what's going on.
Raise the issue he did now from the White House yet again.
That's an old clip from the first Trump administration.
Yeah, that was from the first.
Confused.
Yeah,
but here's what I'm still confused about. What would the congressional hearing be about, and why does the White House have any say over who gets into the?
I think that's what but Jason, you should start us here. Let's talk about the Hall of Fame. Let's talk about Pete Rose. Let's talk about Hall of Fames in general, but first let's start with this one. What is this all about for the listeners who have long since forgotten about Pete Rose, and what are the actual politics of getting into the Hall of Fame aside from what the president is introducing this week?
Okay, so let's talk about how let's refresh on Pete Rose first, right? Pete Rose has the most hits of anybody ever in baseball. He's the all-time hits leader. And then, in the 1980s, when he was a player manager, and then when he was the manager of the Reds, he had throughout his career basically a gambling addiction. He loved to go. There's a really good book called Charlie Hustle that came out last year about this, and he would regularly go to the horse track during spring training, things like that. And he was spending large percentages of his salary on gambling. And then there was like a rumor in the late 80s that he was also betting on baseball, and he denied it. And then it turned out, and then he went, and there was an investigation where baseball went and got like former FBI folks and like took it very seriously. The commissioner at the time, fun trivia fact, Bart Giamatti, whose son is like a staple in our lives as a character actor at Paul Giamatti. So Bart Giamatti, did this investigation and found that Rose was lying to them and that he had been betting on baseball. There was never any evidence found that he was betting against his team or doing anything to fix games or whatever, but that he was betting on his team to win. Okay. He had, gambling was illegal at the time in the way he was doing it, sport betting. So he had all these different bookies and all these relationships with bookies and that kind of thing. So because he kept lying about it and because he wouldn't come clean, he was given the opportunity. Giamatti gave him the lifetime ban, and every commissioner has honored that lifetime ban. Rose has tried to get it lifted. Rose went many, many years before finally taking to the tactic of saying, yes, I did it. Many years. He kept denying it when it was very clear that he was lying. He is quite a character. He would, made his living in like the last 20 years of his life, just signing autographs, going to memorabilia shows, and signing autographs and that kind of thing. And he would sign them. I'm sorry, I bet on baseball, Pete Rose. He would just sign whatever people wanted, but he would do that. And then now he passed away a few months ago. And that tends to change the conversation. And the reason, before we even get into the reasons that baseball can keep him out, when someone who is like on the cusp and may not get into the Hall of Fame or may passes away, if they're controversial at all, it does tend to change the conversation, because what's one of the major reasons that people are not put into the Baseball Hall of Fame? It's because the induction ceremony in the Baseball Hall of Fame is more celebrated than any other Hall of Fame. And frankly, just the Hall of Fame in baseball is a bigger deal than it is in any other sport. And so as a result, if you put Pete Rose in posthumously, you don't have to worry about the scene of honoring this guy in a very public way and him getting to give a speech where he rebuts everything or anything like that. So that's sort of where we are. I'll pause there before we get into the other characters that this would bring into the conversation.
I will say, I do think that there is something to now that he's passed away, things have actually changed. Like it's not just,
yes,
it's more than the crime or whatever he committed. It is the honoring of the living human being. And there is, and part of the reason that the president claims to have tweeted about this is because he complained in the tweet, they should have did it while he was alive. And I actually am like, maybe they shouldn't have done it. Maybe this is exactly the right move. Like, this is the punishment is that you don't get it when you're alive. You don't get to go there and be celebrated for your on-field accomplishments, etc. But now the things have changed. And I'll just put my cards on the table. Like, I think Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. I think Barry Bonds should be in the Hall of Fame. I think Roger Clemens should be in the Hall of Fame. Like, the Hall of Fame celebrates your on-field accomplishments, in my opinion, and those are three of the greatest players in the history of baseball, and it kind of devalues the Hall of Fame not to have them in there. But there is something to the fundamental difference of him having passed away than having been alive. Now, to answer Robbie's original question, the president has absolutely no formal, Congress has no formal or informal real authority over this, but he has the bully pulpit and he's making us talk about it, and a lot of other people on ESPN and Fox News, Fox Sports and Fox News and all other places. So that is the point here. JD Vance, the vice president from Ohio, Cincinnati, where Pete Rose plays, in Ohio. So there's some state level politics at play here. So it is much ado about not very much, but this is the power of the bully pulpit at work. And, whether he's going to change Rob Manfred and baseball's mind, I leave that to Jason and closer observers, but I don't know what you think of all this, Robbie.
I was Googling, because I don't know if you remember this. You might not have been in the same class as I was in, but the Giamatti versus, which Paul Giamatti's dad was the commissioner of baseball.
Yeah.
I know you guys know that, but for the listeners, the Giamatti versus Rose case, we learned it in civil procedure, and I can't remember why. I was just Googling that. I think it had something to do with venue or standing, maybe. But on the principle of it, I would be a stickler and be like, look, the guy like explicitly broke a very important rule that gets to the integrity of the game, and I would be on that corner. If the other thing I Googled while you guys were talking is Mark McGwire in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and he is, and I'm like,
he's not. Decidedly not.
Oh, according to Google, he is. It says yes.
No,
this is AI is wrong. Okay, well then I'm
wrong.
okay. As long as they're banning those people.
Baseball has the morality clause, right, Jason?
Yes.
Like that's the thing that's different about the Baseball Hall of Fame, in addition to what you said.
Because OJ Simpson is in the Football Hall of Fame.
Yep. So the Baseball Hall of Fame is unique, and it has a morality clause. It forces. So okay, before we even get into this, there's also a two-tiered, like sort of not two-tiered, but there's more than one way to get into the Baseball Hall of Fame. First, you have to be voted in. Like there's okay, so 5 years after you retire, you become eligible. And then there's a period you can't get in by the baseball writers when it's been 15 years since you retired, right? And then that's your window. And you have to get 75% of the vote. So that's why you have all these names that appear on the ballot. And then they'll appear on the ballot for a certain number of years. And usually, if you're not like a Mariano Rivera or somebody, or an Ichiro or whatever, you climb each year and get a higher percentage as other players go in. And then eventually you get in. And so the steroid era players, for instance, have been on that ballot, and some of them have now come off. Some of them have run out of time. Some of them are going to run out of time soon. But then you have this second option, and you have a few actually. You have like different committees that can then put you in later. So, for instance, when all the Negro Leagues players were finally put in, and it happened in a couple of waves. They were put in by the Veterans Committee, the Baseball Veterans Committee. So there's different ways to do it. And so what this is talking about is like, okay, let's put Pete Rose in through one of those. So yes, baseball has a morality clause. It's Rule 5. It's the character clause, and it requires that, quote, voting shall be based upon the player's record, playing ability, integrity, sportsmanship, character, and contribution to the teams on which the player played. So the other piece of this is it means there's the upside for players is there's other ways to get in besides just your playing ability, right? There's broadcasters get in, managers get in, things like that. Buck O'Neil, who was a good player in the Negro Leagues, was for many years the greatest ambassador of the Negro Leagues and baseball generally, and then eventually, sadly, got in posthumously, should have got in while he was still alive. So all that is to say, like you said, the Pro Football Hall of Fame doesn't do this. The Pro Football Hall of Fame and the NBA are just like, hey, look, it's what you did on the court. It's what you did on the field. I have my own personal interesting example of this, which I'll be clear has nothing to do with my baseball playing ability because I am not eligible for the Hall of Fame. But Curt Schilling, who some people listening to this may really, if you're not a huge sports fan, you may only be familiar with Curt Schilling through his really rather offensive and frequent political commentary. But for me, I didn't really know when I first ran into this that Curt Schilling was like a super right-wing political guy. And back in 2017, the first time I was on Bill Maher's show, I'm on there and I do the show or whatever. And then a few hours later, I check my social media mentions, and this is back when blue check marks were like, you could count on them. And it appeared to be Curt Schilling just like coming after me and saying all sorts of stuff about what I said on TV.
He was throwing it hide inside.
Yeah. And I was like, wait a minute, is this really Curt Schilling? And I think we have the tweet here where Schilling just replied. I don't even remember what I said. I probably said like it was great to be on Bill Maher or something. And Schilling, this is February 5th, 2017. He replies to me and says, "What a piece of garbage you are. Pains me to say that about someone that served, but man, you need an ass whipping." And once I realized this really is Curt Schilling, I quote tweeted him and I said, "Enjoyed watching you play. Better luck next time with the Hall of Fame balloting. That Rule 5 character clause can be a drag, huh?" And this was not the only time that he and I went back and forth. It happened again at a later time, and there were a bunch of articles about it. This is, by the way that I became friends with a bunch of baseball writers who apparently cannot say anything political ever, but were really excited that this happened. And so, but when you look at Curt Schilling's record, I believe Curt Schilling has the best strikeout to walk ratio in MLB postseason history. So he has quite an argument for the Hall of Fame. And
he's a borderline Hall of Famer, sure. I think, but I think, I think there are legitimate reasons why Curt Schilling could be in the Hall of Fame and couldn't. We can debate those, but that's not this podcast.
Major postseason performer.
Pete Rose is the all-time hits leader in baseball. Barry Bonds, even before, if you erase the 1990s, basically from where, the steroid era, he was winning MVPs and batting 350 when he was a skinny, kid for the first 6-8 years of his career, winning Gold Gloves, etc. Roger Clemens in the 80s was dominant, right? So it's just crazy to me that that Rule 5 can kind of overrule those things in the way that if you think of O.J. Simpson, acquitted by a jury of his peers, by the way, but O.J. Simpson or Antonio Brown,
not every time, though. He wasn't acquitted every time.
I'm joking. But Antonio Brown, you think of all God knows the NFL Hall of Fame. I don't know everybody who's in it. Basketball Hall of Fame certainly has some to-do racist and otherwise unsavory characters in it. But it just feels to me like it is, and I can't believe I'm agreeing with the president. I mean, I don't think that this is a ridiculous thing for him to be talking about, but putting that aside, let the man is a great baseball player, was a great baseball player. So let him in the Hall of Fame and celebrate what he did on the field. And let's not talk about what he did off the field. And to me, it's, the politics, injecting people's personal politics, whether that be Curt Schilling or, gambling. First of all, the mores on that have changed pretty significantly since the 1980s, right? We went from whatever illegal, like you said, when Pete Rose was doing it, to part of the telecast in 20.
However, you still cannot bet on your own sport.
Yeah, but point is, like, it is ubiquitous, as we've talked about on this podcast before. Like, at some point, you have to. I can't make a good legal rule for this. It feels very. As for those of you who are lawyers, you'll know it when you see it kind of thing.
Bad facts make bad law.
Bad facts, exactly right. But this is one of those things where you're really introducing with Rule 5 in general, I think you're introducing externalities into the decision-making that are way too subjective to overrule on-field performance, which maybe you need to weight on-field performance way, way higher. Steroids, harder question, maybe, because I think that's obviously affecting on-field performance.
That's why I disagree with you on the steroids one. The Pete Rose, I could be persuaded, but they did real active harm to the game. Like, you think about, like, at least to me, I used to love baseball. I used to love it almost as much as I love football, and I used to go to all the games and everything. And there were many things that happened, salary cap issues being one of them, but that home run chase really screwed up my passion for the sport. And it's also destroyed the stat itself. Like, when you're watching Like we were watching Aaron Judge this past season. How much different would that be if you had real statistics? Like, and assuming everybody's clean now, like that they would actually be chasing records that you had some belief in. I actually think they really harmed the sport, and those guys, I see a lot clearer of a case that they should be blackballed than Pete Rose.
See, okay, I'm going to go the other way, because when the home race, when the steroid era happened, right, and when it really hit its crescendo, you're talking at that point, I believe, 6 or 7 years after the strike, and baseball needed that. That needed the summer of 98. It needed the summer of 99. Now, once Bonds was hitting like 73 or however many it was, didn't really need it at that point. Yeah. But my point is, I do think that, baseball itself can take responsibility there. And it can say, like, obviously, if we didn't want this, we could have done more to keep it from happening. And if you're the players at that moment, and remember, the reason Clemens is not in is because Clemens was on steroids. And if you're a hitter, you're going, okay, my opposition, the pitchers, have this enhancement, and nothing's and I've got to try to win. This is how I make a living. I'm not excusing the behavior so much as I'm saying we have to remember what the environment was in which they made these choices, right? Sure. But really where I come down is, the Hall of Fame is a museum. That's what it actually is. It's actually a museum about baseball. And so where I come from is not like, do we let these people in or do we not? It's a little like critical race theory of me in a way. It's like, let's tell the whole story of baseball the way I believe we should tell the whole story of America. So I do believe that baseball should have the all-time hits leader. I do believe, despite my personal interactions with Curt Schilling, I do believe that a clutch postseason performer who has a record like the greatest strikeout to walk ratio in postseason history, I do believe that the museum is less complete without that. But I also believe that the museum is less complete without the other stuff, without having exhibits about the steroid era, without having an exhibit about Pete Rose's behavior, and about the, and if you're going to let Curt Schilling in, probably, you may not have to have it on his plaque, but there may need to be a whole exhibit at the Hall of Fame about members of the Hall of Fame who have, engaged in behavior that baseball is not proud of, right? Like, so, but then on the other hand, you can also have a whole thing. There should be more stuff. I don't know how much is there at the Hall of Fame about the ball players who were in World War II and Korea, about the fact that Ted Williams was like, his wingman was John Glenn, and he was like the best pilot in his squadron, right? And Yogi Berra stormed the beach at D-Day. Like those, let's have the whole thing in there, and that's where I come from.
Hey, sign me up for that. As long as, if it means you tell the story of the great on-field performers and you talk about their foibles as well as their successes, like, great. It doesn't have to be all, Disney-ification. No offense to our under market capped friends, but it doesn't have to be the Disney-ification of of baseball. It needs to be the story of baseball, and the story of baseball has to include Pete Rose. If it doesn't include Pete Rose and Barry Bonds, and the flip side of what Ravi said, to me, it's hard for me to take baseball seriously when Pete Rose and Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, who were like, three. I mean, I didn't really grow up with Pete Rose, but definitely Bonds and Clemens, and even McGwire and Sosa, to your point, the 98 home run race is like so central to the history of baseball that the fact that it's not talked about in baseball history or in the Hall of Fame makes the whole thing feel less than, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's too subjective right now. I mean, look, on the one hand, yeah, the statistic is bogus. If you look at Bonds, and Bonds was enhanced, and McGwire and Sosa were enhanced and all that. But on the other hand, Maris had, Judge had to break Maris's record, and Maris had to break Ruth's record, and Ruth didn't play against anybody who was any less white than me. Like, I mean, so what does his record even mean, right? And then you had Josh Gibson hitting like 800 home runs in the Negro League, but we don't have the stats to necessarily. I mean, honestly, he's probably the all-time home run leader. And I think he actually is now because they've put his stats in. So that's an example of like doing it right, telling the whole history. Anyway, you could analogize this entire thing to like what's going on with all these executive orders with what kind of education we're doing. It's interesting that in baseball, apparently the Trump administration goes the other way. And they're like, tell the whole story, you know. So
True. That's a podcast for another day. But it's a good discussion. I honestly am looking forward to seeing what, if anything, MLB gets pressured into doing here and how that affects this discussion, because it's obviously not as big as the day-to-day machinations of what's going on in politics, but it is actually a big deal to people who care a lot about baseball and care a lot about sports. And as we talk about in this podcast all the time, sports matter. So it's not I guess I'll give the president a little bit of credit for bringing it up. That's as far as I'll go.
And also remember that it's him doing what he does and inserting himself into things.
Exactly. And also him doing something that, for somebody who supported him, which is obviously a big part of this too. Pete Rose was a Trump supporter in his day.
And like he's going after his usual audience, which is just like white dudes. I'm sure.
Hey, a stop clock is right. A stop clock is right twice a day or twice a year.
Yeah, exactly. So
anyway,
I would do aging athlete corner, but I kind of did it for the two of you over our text thread. While I was sitting in the airport to come home. But I guess for me, I had my old man hardball tournament, my baseball tournament in Vegas, which went great. I got to play well. Most of the teams we played against, so like 90% of the players spoke exclusively Spanish, which is always a pretty good measure of competition in baseball. And but the other thing going on is I have been diagnosed with this very minor hernia, and I can't decide whether to go ahead and get the surgery when I have no symptoms, really, no pain at all. And so anyway, for people who listen to this, like, if I am genuinely interested in people's opinion as to whether I should get this surgically corrected when it's not causing me any problems at all, and I want to be able to keep lifting and all that kind of stuff. So.
Well, I want to reply. The amount of noise and bass coming through my walls is so high that I don't know if you guys could pick up on it in this.
It's not too bad.
Yeah, it's over for me. It's bad, but I hope you recover well. And I know
that's the thing. It's very confusing. There's nothing to recover from other than when I look down, I see the slightest bump. But I'm like, but it's not causing me any trouble. So I don't, anyway. So, Philip just put in the chat, being old, that no, actually I looked it up. It's a very common injury for athletes and lifters at all ages. 27% of men will end up with this at some point. Okay. Mature, he says. Thank you. All right. That's a good time to end. Thanks everybody for listening. Please go and leave us a 5-star review, comment, share this with other folks. We're still trying to grow this very new show. But as always, thanks for listening. Sports actually do matter quite a lot.